Hey guys, Wolves here. Happy Wednesday. So tomorrow and Friday, what you need to make sure you have done, or I guess today and tomorrow, what you need to have done for Friday, you're going to watch a series of video discussions that I give about the actual stories we've read. Make sure you've completed all common lit assignments. There should be two. There should be one for Lamb to the Slaughter and one for the Landlady by Roald Dahl, and complete your DGP handout. Now, things got a little messy this week. I think I gave one class DGP sentence 3 and the other class DGP sentence 4. Whatever handout I've given you, do that one, and we'll do the other one in class on Friday. So now, watch those videos. What we're going to discuss is kind of the plot and character similarities between the stories. The goal is for you to see how each of these stories kind of moves through the same progression and maybe has more in common than we first assume. And that kind of gets to a discussion we had in class today about perception versus reality. I want you to think about the Landlady and Lamb to the Slaughter in particular. Now, do this for me. We did this in class, so if you've already done this, just make your parents do this and see what they think. Okay, I want you to think of any number, and then in your head, answer this question. How many times can you divide that number by 2? So let's say I go with the number 2. I can divide it by 2 into 1. Then I can divide 1 into 0.5. I can divide 0.5 into 0.25. How far can I do that? All right, raise your hand if you know the answer. Raise your hand if your answer is forever. You can divide any number into forever. So do this. And we're all going to look silly, but I want you to do this. I want you to put your finger about a foot in front of your nose. And then I want you to continually divide the distance between your finger and your nose in half until what happens? Raise your hand if you think you're touching your nose. Okay, so what we've established is two things. In theory, I can divide the distance between my finger and my nose in half forever. But I perceive, in reality, that I'm touching my nose. So which is it? Is perception reality? Is the perception of touch here the reality of the situation? Even though in theory I know that I should be able to divide that number in half forever. That's a bit of a philosophical conundrum we studied in college. I forget the exact guy who thought it up. But one thing I just did for you is disprove math. So, use that to your advantage. Also, just think about the implications of this. What that means is, even though we think we have reached our destination, mathematically, we are only ever approaching our destination. So that just gets to this big idea of, is what you perceive in the world the way the world actually is? And that gets to our stories, which we will discuss now. Okay, so I've got 3 plot maps here. Now, when you come to class on Friday, or when you get ready to do Friday's assignments, I want you to have your plot maps ready to go in front of you, and your character maps. We'll talk about character maps here in a minute. So at the top, I've got Lamb to the Slaughter, then I've got Landlady, and then I've got Prey. So remember, Lamb to the Slaughter was by Roald Dahl, along with Landlady, and Prey was by Richard Matheson. All of these stories are set in the same time period, 1950s. You've got 2 set in England and 1 set in probably America. But you've got the same customs, beliefs, and values. You've got this idea that women are docile homemakers that live at home and raise the family. And you've got this idea that men are out there doing all the hard work and they're the breadwinners. You've got this idea that science is important and has the answers, because we're in the Cold War, we're in the space race, and we're trying to make sure that everyone is focused on science and mathematics and what really matters, what's actually real. And then you've got, let's get into it. So in Lamb to the Slaughter, the Landlady, and Prey, you've all got very important characters that are women. And I want you to think about this. What in each of these stories is happening during the exposition? In Lamb to the Slaughter, Mary is waiting, right? She's waiting for Patrick to come home. That's her life. Every day she waits for Patrick to come home. In the Landlady, what's the Landlady doing at the beginning of the story? We're introduced to the protagonist. The protagonist is actually Billy. Billy has just arrived. Where is he? In London? He's arrived at his destination, and he is going to find a place to stay. And he comes across a bed and breakfast. But the Landlady, so Billy arrives landlady equals waiting. When he goes to, remember, he knocks on the door at the bed and breakfast, and the landlady just like, boom, right there with the, right there at the door. He said that he said the dame was like a jack-in-the-box. She just popped right out, almost like she was waiting for him. In fact, she even says that she's been waiting for him in the story. Now you've got Prey. The protagonist of Prey is Amelia. And what is Amelia waiting on? She is, she's not necessarily waiting, but she's kind of getting ready. What's she getting ready for? She's getting ready for a date, right, with her boyfriend. But then she makes a phone call to her mother, and the mother reveals herself as this character that is kind of controlling this person's life and controlling Amelia's life, and she has to cancel her date with Arthur. So at the beginning of each story, you've got this idea of the characters are getting ready for something, and a woman is waiting for something or getting ready for something. Now, when we get to the rising action, let's start thinking about similarities. What do all of these rising actions have in them? What kicks off the rising action for Mary? What is this inciting event? Remember that she has a conversation with Patrick. That conversation with Patrick is what really gets this thing going. When he says to her that he's leaving her, and I guess it's not really a conversation, it's not a dialogue. She talks to him, he barks at her, and then he tells her how it is, and then boom, Patrick is dead. So a conversation kicks it off. Look at the landlady. The landlady is not an action-packed story, right? Not a lot really happens. Billy gets to the place, and he's at the place. So what kicks off the rising action again is a conversation with the landlady. So the conflict in each of these stories starts going based upon a conversation. And again, in Prey, think about this. What would have happened if Amelia had just not had the conversation with her mother, or if the conversation had gone differently? What if she'd never called Arthur to call off the whole date? So again, this is a convo-based conflict. Convo with Mom and Arthur. That says Arthur. So each of these rising actions has to do with a conversation that kicks it off. And this one, the climax happens very quickly. Remember, with Land of the Slaughter, the climax happens very quickly. Patrick is killed, and then most of that story is following action. In The Landlady, it's really hard to determine when the climax occurs because it's kind of a slow build. And I think the climax is going to occur when Billy doesn't have a realization in this story, but what do we realize about the situation? And how does that make the story more interesting? What's the following action and resolution there? And in Prey, I think the climax in that story happens a little later on. Because we know that during the rising action, the doll attacks, but there's not like one big moment through that scenario. I think most of the story here is rising action, and the climax is when Amelia puts the doll in the oven. The following action and resolution is when she opens the oven, and we see what happens to Amelia. Now let's go talk about the resolutions and see if we can figure out what they have in common. So in each of these resolutions, let's see here. Has Mary resolved her conflict with Patrick? Yes. Has Mary resolved her conflict with the police? Yes. In The Landlady, we know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, and we know who's going to. I'm trying not to spoil anything for if anyone hasn't read it yet. You've got to read The Landlady. We know what's going to happen at the end of that story. How is that like? We'll say Mary equals victorious. And then let's look at the end of Prey. At the end of Prey, Amelia is technically not Amelia anymore, right? She has become he who kills. So at the end of Prey, Amelia equals victorious. So each of these stories has something in common. You've got to read, we got to figure out with The Landlady who is victorious in that one. So this this is what we're going to go for on Friday. We're going to talk about, I'm going to give you some constructed response questions about how specific plot elements of each story are similar. So what I would do if I were you is I would go through the story. If you have a hard copy, go through and literally mark on it. If you've done your stories on Common Lit, pull up Common Lit again and go through and find parts of each story that show how a character, a woman is waiting in the beginning, how a conversation kicks off the conflict, and how the resolutions of each story are similar. All right, that takes care of that. Let's go talk about character in the next video. Yeah, I'll post another video about character. Go check that one out.